Okay, so today what I'm going to show you is how to get the scales off a fish. So what I have today is some salmon, and so I have a piece of salmon, and I need to get the scales off. When you purchase your salmon in the store or wherever you get it from, it's going to have scales on this side of the salmon, and the scales normally lay down a certain way. And what you would normally want to do is take your fork and run your fork the opposite way that the scales lay down to remove the scales from this portion of the salmon. You can use a knife or a fork, but for this demonstration I'm going to use a fork because I just think it's safer. So if I had a knife, then it may be a little more dangerous for certain people to use a knife to get the scales off. So basically, like I said, just lay it down and run your fork the opposite way of the scales. And as you can see, the scales start to come off of the salmon. See, those are the scales. So you just keep running your fork the opposite way of the scales until you get all of the scales completely off of the salmon. You want to do this because it'll be nearly impossible to eat this piece of salmon with the scales on, because I'm not a doctor or anything, but I think it'll be pretty hard to swallow these scales if you try to eat the fish with the scales on. So if you try to eat the fish after after you cook it with the scales on, so you want to try to get all the scales off. And as you can see, as I scrape the opposite direction that the scales lay, the scales come off pretty easily. So I'm just going to put those there for now. So you just keep, like I said, scraping in the opposite direction until all the scales are off the fish, or the salmon in this case. So I'm not adding a lot of pressure, but I'm adding a little bit of pressure just so I can make sure all the scales come off. So for the most part, I've gotten the scales off of this piece of fish. So what I'll do now is I'll rinse this off and put it in a bag and then stick it in the freezer. Okay, so I've completed this small piece of salmon, and I've rinsed it off, and I put it into a Ziploc bag because I'm going to freeze it. I'm not going to eat it today. It's like 12:35 a.m. so I'm not going to cook it tonight. But so now I have a bigger piece of salmon. This is much bigger than the other piece. I don't know if I can get it all in the camera. So really big piece of salmon here. So what I'll do is I'll do this exact same thing I did with the smaller piece. I'll take the fork. Like I said, you could use a knife, but it's a little more dangerous to use a knife. But I'll take the fork and run the fork in the opposite direction of the way the scales naturally lay, and then I'll get the scales off of the fish. Okay, so let's see. So this piece of salmon is much bigger than the previous piece. So I'm gonna just complete the same steps to get the scales off of this piece of fish. I'll probably have to cut it up to put it in the bags, you know, have it in 2 separate bags since it's so big, but regardless. So I'm just gonna run this fork, same fork, in a different direction than what the scales naturally lay, and it should get all the scales off. Hopefully you can see the scales rising up off of the salmon. So just gonna lay it down. It's easy to do when it's laying down. So I'm just gonna keep going, scraping these scales off until I get them all of them off this piece of salmon. And then once I get them all off, I'm gonna do the same thing I did with the first piece. I'm gonna rinse it off and then put it in a Ziploc bag so it can be frozen until I'm ready to eat this, you know, both pieces basically. So I'll probably cook both of them at the same time because it's just more efficient that way, but it'll probably take me like a day or two to eat all of this salmon. You know, I know it's probably enough serving for multiple people, but it's gonna be all for me this time. So, but I don't know if you can see it, but these scales are rising up. Now I'll have to rinse this off after I, you know, get them all off, just to wash them off. You know, just so you know, everything will be off, even though they're, you know, off, loosen off. I'll rinse this piece of salmon off to get all the scales off. Hopefully you can see this. These scales rising up. It's on the fork. It's all on this fish, but it's getting the scales off. I'm just running the fork in the opposite direction that the scales normally lay, and you know, that's how I'm going to get all the scales off. Oh, that's how I get all the scales off of the fish. So it's a pretty big piece of fish here. So gotta, you know, lay it out a little more. Get this side, get the back of it. So I'm putting, you know, not a whole bunch, but quite a bit of pressure down, you know, to make sure I get the scales up. So I'm putting a little force behind every you know, rake, I guess you would call it, up the back to get the scales off. So I'm doing that to make sure, you know, I get them up, because like I said earlier on the other piece, I don't think, you know, if you cook this with the scales on, I've never done it, you know, the fish will be easily eaten. And you know, you could possibly see, these are all the scales. You could possibly you know, not be able to eat it unless you get the scales off. But like I said, I've never even tried it, but I've never eaten a piece of fish with scales on it. You know, eating a part of the fish with the scales on it, I feel like that. But so for the most part, I've gotten all the scales, you know, even though they're loose and I gotta rinse them off, they're not stuck to the back anymore. They're just, you know, on there because they're just loose and they need to be rinsed off of the back. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna rinse it out, rinse the back off of, we'll rinse the loose scales off the back. And I'm gonna cut this in half and put it in the Ziploc bag and then freeze it and then eat it on a different day. And I'll show you, you know, that once I have rinsed this off. So I'm just gonna run this under some water just so I can get all these scales all these loose scales off, you know, completely off. They're already loose after I raked the fork over the back. So okay guys, so I rinsed it off, and you can't really tell, I guess, but there aren't any scales left. I got them all off. So I was going to use a separate Ziploc bag, but I'm just going to put it in the same bag because it can fit, and then I'm just going to stick these guys in the freezer. So then I'll eat it on a separate day. Thanks for watching this video. Could you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and leave a comment? And if you think this video will help anyone, you can feel free to share it with anyone that you think it could help. Thanks for watching, and until next time.